Hello, friends, and welcome back. This is episode number 99 of the Liberty Weekly podcast. And as always, I'm your host, Patrick McFarland. This one, we are doing a deep dive on the libertarian classic, Frederic Bastiat's The Law. And let me tell you, folks, this will be a real treat for us here. We got the co-host Keith Knight back on the show to go through it. And I mean, this is just the quintessential libertarian guide. Frederic Bastiat, I think he was in the 17th or the 18th century French philosopher, and literally every single staple of your roadmap to a free society is in here. All the popular points that us libertarians like to make. Ron Paul is famous for using this book over and over again. He's talked about it. And it's just packed full of really great stuff. And we'll talk about this maybe in the episode, Keith. But I really think that abiding by this would bring us to a literal ANCAP society and not just a minarchist one. So why don't you say hi, Keith, and then we'll dive into it.
What's happening, man? I'm very happy to be back on. And it's so funny. Rereading this book, it was like I had read it for the first time. So I'm looking forward to going over some notes I have.
Okay, excellent. So what's your first one? Let's just go right into it.
So what he refers to the law as law is common force organized to act as an obstacle to injustice. Law is organized justice. And the function of law is to protect the free exercise of rights and to prevent any person from interfering with the free exercise of the same rights by any other person. If one person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows that a group of men have the right to organize and support common force to protect these rights consistently. That is so important because all he's saying is, if you, the individual, have it, you have the right to delegate it to a larger organization of people. What he doesn't say is, you gain more rights when you do things through government. So you don't have the right to tax, but a group of people voting then have the right to tax and regulate and bomb and enforce minimum wage laws. So this sentence right here is an anarchist statement as close as you can find.
Right, and I thought that was so great. I think this is right on page 2. Literally the second page. So he gets into this logical contradiction that if people get together to defend their rights, and that's what the purpose of them getting together is, then it just doesn't make sense for them to use the power of the law to do something contrary to defending rights. It just doesn't compute.
Sure, and that really is the no rulers anarchist society that I think is the only morally justified one. He then sort of ignites natural law and says when a portion of wealth is transferred from the person who owns it without his consent and without compensation, and whether by force, by fraud to anyone who does not own it, then I say that property is violated, that an act of plunder is committed. I say that this act is exactly what the law is supposed to suppress always and everywhere. He says the law has now converted plunder into a right in order to protect plunder, pointing out the obvious example. Government has the right to violate property rights. Why do we have a government? To protect property rights. A total contradiction. He was able to see all that time ago.
Yeah, and I suppose it really depends on who you ask because, even when I was in law school, I would always try to bring up these points that the law is inherently violence or force at its very root of it. And people in law school really didn't even understand that. So, back in the day when we had the founding fathers going over what the purpose of government is, they would say, well, at least we have it in writing, that the purpose of government is to, secure our life, liberty, and property. Some people don't believe that anymore, I suppose, but we have that foundation.
He goes on to say the law has been perverted by the influence of two entirely different causes, stupid greed and false philanthropy. So there are people who are inherently immoral and some people with good intentions who are engaging in immoral actions without really, having gotten a good grasp on the philosophy of what the law is. He says they wish to live and prosper at the expense of others. Citing the origin of plunder, he says, man is naturally inclined to avoid pain. It follows, then, men will resort to plunder whenever plunder is easier than work. So if the government's really big, companies would rather go to the government to try to regulate competitors rather than innovate and make better products for consumers and make money that way. Hazlitt referred to that as the economic versus the political means. He says all measures of the law should protect property and punish plunder. That's really the essence of the entire book. Two people who seek power, they either wish to stop lawful plunder or they may wish to share in it. So Ron Paul versus like all other congressmen ever. And the results of legal plunder is everyone's conscience is erased between the distinction between justice and injustice. Because under the guise of the law, it's not stealing, it's just taxation. It's not violently dominating other people, it's just regulation. What's wrong with regulation?
Correct. And you really get into the seen versus the unseen in here too. When I don't know if Bastiat did he bring it up in the law, the seen versus the unseen?
I don't believe so.
Well, it's inherent in here. You know, you would have people all throughout society who believe that they are doing good. All they see is, oh, we have built this public school and now all the people will come and be educated. But what they don't see is the money that people otherwise would have in their pocket had we not forcefully extorted them from their funds, or they don't even see the violence itself. So they don't make this connection. They don't make the connection between they think they're doing good by providing something for society. But what is unseen is, well, what institutions, had we not built this public school, what institutions would society spontaneously create in the voluntary private sector to fulfill the demand that obviously is there because a whole bunch of people wanted a public school and they voiced their opinion that way. So they don't see that the market could have addressed this. They could have done it better. They could have done it without this violence. So there's a lot of things that they don't see, but the thing they do see is the public school. Another thing that I wanted to address is just this idea that, well, I lost it. Sorry, Keith. You can go on. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Let me know if it does. This is just one of those sort of side notes that it's incredible that the sophists of the world, not necessarily just the socialists, leftists, or statists, have really put on, but he says, he sort of channels the argument from intimidation, as Ayn Rand proved it, anything that shows disapproval. He goes, if you suggest a doubt as to the morality of these institutions, referring to socialism, it is boldly said that you are a dangerous innovator. As Tucker Carlson just said to Ben Shapiro, we can't have innovation because people might lose their jobs. A utopian, we've all been called that, if we hold principles consistently. A theorist, because conspiracy theorists hadn't been implemented by the CIA yet. A subversive, you would shatter the foundation upon which society rests. It's amazing. In 1850, he's talking about the same things we're called today. Whenever we, put forth the non-aggression principle, self-ownership, hold the state to the same moral standards we'd hold any other group, it's incredible that they were using the same tactics all that time ago. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, he does it again later on in the book. I have the fee edition. I don't know if you can see in the video version. It's just the fee pamphlet edition. I have another Bastiat reader that has a lot of his other selected works in it too. But you also get this, let's see here. This common argument that socialists will put out is that mankind is inherently dangerous and they can't look after themselves. Mankind is inherently evil. Yet we need to take a select few people from mankind, which is inherently evil, and give them the power to rule over everyone else. It's the same stuff that we're hearing centuries later, just in a different lexicon, I suppose.
That's one of my favorite parts in the book that I have notes on later. One of my favorite debate moments ever. Tom Willicott is debating Larkin Rose, and he goes, it's just, I just don't trust people. I've seen so many bad things in all my years of doing all this stuff. It's just people are bad. People are greedy. And then he just stops talking, and Larkin goes, "What species do you want running government?" And that was just my favorite mic drop.
The lizard people.
I know. He then goes on to talk about universal suffrage being a sacred dogma, which it is a crime to examine or doubt. Why are women and children prevented from voting? He asks. That's an interesting statement to make, because simply that is extending humanity. So, like, if voting is inherently good, shouldn't we extend it to not just men, but women and children? Because the children are affected by it, not like the fetuses of the world, but at some point at 10, in 1850, 10-year-olds are working, 10-hour days. So that is really a lot of what we suffer with today. It's that we have trouble extending morality to the Vietnamese people, or the Muslim people, or the people in Yemen, or extending morality to government employees. If I can't do it, we should extend that to those people with badges. He goes on to say, if the law were confined to its proper functions, everyone's interest in the law would be the same. So you wouldn't really have lobbyists. It would be everyone saying, don't use plunder, don't initiate violence. Plunder expands under the pretense of organization, regulation, protection, or encouragement. All things we hear today. We can steal because we as a society need to do things together. We need to regulate industries. We need to protect industries from foreign competition. And we need to encourage people to make their lives better. Under these circumstances, every class will aspire to grasp the law. And it's amazing. He says, now, the best place that the law is correctly practiced in 1850, he said, the United States. No country in the world where the law is kept more within its proper domain, the protection of every person's liberty. There are two issues, however, in which the United States falls short: slavery and tariffs. Talk about a guy ahead of his time.
Right.
Slavery is a violation of the law of liberty. The protective tariff is a violation by law of property. Unbelievable. He was able to see that in his time, when it would have been so easy for him to say, well, that's the law there. Without it, they wouldn't have the cotton industry. The slaves are so dumb at this point. If they were set free, that's a utopian idea. He was still consistent back then.
Another really great point that he brings up is the idea of the law or the state being the loaded gun in the room. And I really love this point, and I really keyed into it when I was reading it for this episode. But all across the country, the state that of politics in the United States at this current juncture, everything is politicized. Bathrooms are I would challenge you to think of one thing that you do throughout your day, or one thing in this world that is not politicized in some way, shape, or form. This is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it is creating a climate in the United States of division, and division can be good or bad. Division in the sense of divide and conquer is bad, where people in the United States, are fighting. They're so focused on fighting the blues or fighting the red that they are not paying attention to the government itself and what the government is doing. So in that sense, division is bad. But in some sense, division is good, because if you have the entirety of the United States living under one rule, the Supreme Court is supreme over everyone else. They decide these ultimate decisions of what should be left to smaller local communities, while we get this division of people who say, well, we can no longer live together. Now that Orange Man Bad is elected president, we can't live with the other half. We can't live with those people over there. Hopefully, as libertarians, we would hope that people would realize the fact that we're not all meant to live under one system, under one way of doing things, and relinquish some of that state control over these issues. I'm not very optimistic about that, but ultimately, the state is the loaded gun in the room. Everyone reaches for the power of the state, and it politicizes things. It causes that kind of division.
Absolutely. He goes on to say there are two kinds of plunder, legal and illegal. Is the law just? C, if the law takes from some persons what belongs to them and gives it to other persons to whom it does not belong. See if the law benefits one citizen at the expense of another, by doing what the citizen himself cannot do without committing a crime. Again, he reemphasizes, if I can't do it, why can the state? If it's a crime for me, why is it noble and virtuous for you, let alone permissible? Thus, we have an infinite number of plans for organizing legal plunder: tariffs, protection, benefits, subsidies, encouragements, progressive taxation, public schools, guaranteed jobs, guaranteed profits, minimum wages, a right to relief, a right to the tools of labor, free credit, and so on. All these plans as a whole, with their common aim of legal plunder, constitute socialism. Socialists desire to protect legal plunder. There's three choices we have for society: the few plunder the many, everybody plunders everybody, or nobody plunders anybody. Thoughts on those?
Try calling your your conservative parents out as socialists if they say, "Oh, we need public schools," for instance, or else people will be uneducated, or we need roads. We need the state to provide roads, or else we wouldn't be able to, connect one house to another or whatnot. Socialism is the collective ownership of the means of production. Bastiat calls it out for what it is, man. And he actually correctly identifies socialists as being monopolists in the book, because the state has a monopoly on these things. The state are the only ones that can provide justice. We don't have a free market in justice. So that's my...
And that's another great contradiction. All the economists are like, monopolies are bad, so the state shouldn't have a monopoly on law or regulating or taxation or what laws people have to abide by in certain districts. So there should be competing arrangements. No, that's another blatant contradiction that drives me nuts. But what do socialists do? He's talking about the euphemisms that they use, which they still use today. They cleverly disguise this legal plunder from others, and even from themselves, under the seductive names of fraternity, unity, organization, and association. Because we ask so little from the law, only justice, the socialists thereby assume that we reject fraternity, unity, organization, and association. The socialist brands us with the name individualists. Socialists confuse government from society. We disapprove of state education, then the socialists say we're opposed to education. We object to a state religion, then the socialists say we want no religion at all. We reject to state-enforced equality, then they say we're against equality, and so on. It is as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we do not want the state to raise grain. So many good points in there. I think it just speaks for itself. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about how the state is the loaded gun in the room and how it actually causes division, whereas socialists would have you believe that this is everyone coming together to decide what's best for humanity, and this is fraternity and equality. Well, what actually brings people together is the free market and free enterprise and free exchange, voluntary on that level. So Dave Smith uses this example all the time. Dave is a Jew living in New York City. Well, every day maybe he would hail a taxi and or an Uber or a Lyft. He gets into the Uber or the Lyft driven by a Muslim guy. At the end of the day, they both, he wanted the Uber ride more than he wanted the $10 in his pocket, so he gave it to the Muslim cab driver or the Uber Lyft driver who wanted the $10 more than his time and energy spent driving the Uber. And everyone goes home satisfied. Dave doesn't care that the Uber driver is a Muslim. The Muslim wants the money, doesn't really care that he's bringing a Jew to work. It works out. You have these people interacting on a level. It's about money. They get along. It doesn't matter.
Terrific example of how the market promotes harmony, unity, and association, while the state, as he mentions earlier, everyone's trying to grab hold of it, because if I don't have it, then you have $4 trillion at your disposal every year to enforce on me. That's the entire U.S. economy every presidential term. It's like 16 trillion now or something. So that's why it's so freaking dangerous. Bastiat goes on to say, this is what you were mentioning earlier, which I love.
Okay.
While mankind tends towards evil, the legislators yearn for good. I don't trust people, so we need government, some people will say. As Sheldon Richman once told me, the statist believes that people are so stupid and ignorant, except on election day. Then those results are totally valid, and that's the will of the people. Everyone's thinking rationally. That's another example of them not applying their own principles consistently. What is the attitude of the Democrat when political rights are under discussion? How does he regard the people when a legislator is to be chosen? Then it is claimed that the people have instinctive wisdom, that they are gifted with the finest perception, that their will is always right. The general will cannot err. Voting cannot be too universal. Everyone must vote. Universal suffrage. The claims of these organizers of humanity raise another question, which I often ask them, and which, so far as I know, they have not answered. If the natural tendencies of mankind are so bad, then it is not safe to permit people to be free. How is it that the tendencies of these organizers are always good? Do not the legislators and their appointed agents also belong to the human race? Same thing Larkin Rose mentioned.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's always a good point. I love seeing it in memes all across Twitter, and it's a reoccurring one for good reason, because it's such a great point. So it kind of gets into the state is us thing. We are the state and the state is us. So no matter what we do, it's always justified because we are the government. We're doing it to ourselves. And yeah, not a fan of that.
Yeah. For more on that, you can look at mine and Patrick's discussion on Anatomy of the State, where Rothbard just rips that apart.
Show notes. Write it down, Keith. Show notes.
Show notes. He then talks about the paternal government, saying that that there's an idea that the state is the source of all progress. He references, going back to the Egyptian government, that the state is seen as the mechanism of progress. And how often is it said that if you're not a progressive, you're not for progress, you're not for change, you're not for doing new things that are better for the rest of us? He quotes Rousseau as saying, "The will of the people is the theory of the total inertness of mankind in the presence of the legislators." He also then, in that same section, claims socialists claim liberty inevitably leads to monopoly, something we get to this day. The Myth of Natural Monopoly, show note, by Tom DiLorenzo, totally refutes this. And if you're against monopolies, obviously, the state having a monopoly on violence is the one monopoly you should be most afraid of. Not one you can boycott at any time, and so forth. Any thoughts on those?
No, I think I got that. I'm writing the show notes down. I tracked it down in the meantime. That is our episode on Anatomy of the State, which was a very enjoyable one, if I do say so, was libertyweekly.net/LL6. The letters LL and the number 6 for Liberation Library 6. And that'll be in the show notes page as well, along with Tom DiLorenzo link, Amazon affiliate link to Tom DiLorenzo's The Myth of Natural Monopoly. So that sounds great.
Bastiat then clarifies his position. Please understand that I do not dispute their right to invent social combinations, to advertise them, to advocate them, and to try to put them upon themselves at their own expense and risk. But I do dispute their right to impose these plans upon us by law, by force, and to compel us to pay for them with our taxes. That's 1850s for taxation is theft. They need only to give up the idea of forcing us to acquiesce to their groups and series. I ask only that we be permitted to decide upon these plans for ourselves, that we not be forced to accept them directly or indirectly if we find them to be contrary to our best interests or repugnant to our consciences. That's the ultimate regulation that a society needs, the ability to opt out, not an FDA. The main thing is I have to be able to not fund the FDA if I read, Death by Regulation by Mary J. Ruwart, where she says the FDA is killing millions of people by stopping things from coming on the market. He finishes by saying, if persons are incompetent to judge for themselves, then why all this talk about universal suffrage? Any thoughts on those?
Well, I was going to pick apart. So what he was saying about, okay, if you like the way that, if you like worker owned factories or organizing society in that way, collectivities, socialism in that certain sense, the workers own the means of production, cooperatives, XYZ, that's actually kind of called mutualism, which I don't think that we have any beef with on a level, do we, Keith?
I don't at all.
Yeah, right. So mutualism works as long as it's voluntary. And if you think that that is a better system than capitalism, well, pure capitalism in our certain sense, individualist capitalism, go ahead and do that. That's fine. Just leave me out. In fact, if it would benefit me to be part of a worker-owned cooperative, then I would totally do that. Sheldon Richman had that great point about it in his recent debates at the Soho Forum. And this has been all over libertarian podcasts in the last few weeks. Do you recall this, Keith? He was on Dave Smith talking about Sheldon Richman had this debate against a socialist. And
you mean Gene Epstein?
Oh, yep, Gene Epstein. I confused the two. Sheldon Richman is from the Libertarian Institute, of which we contribute to. But sorry, so I got the name script mixed up. This is Gene Epstein had that debate, and he made this point over and over and over and over again ad nauseum. And he really destroyed the socialist guy just by saying, hey, if you like worker-owned collectivities, why can't you have that? Show us that it's a better path forward, please. By all means, just give me an opt-out.
Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with the workers owning the factors of production. But then again, it assumes that people who own don't work, and it assumes that workers can't buy stock in their company or other companies. So I think all of socialism is a total lie. But because there's nothing that a socialist can't have in a private property society that we would totally be against. I'm just thinking, I think Michael Moore said, look, here's this example of the workers owning the factors of production. And all he's showing is that socialism can happen voluntarily in a capitalist society. He's a total moron who can't see his hand in front of his face. Another thing is that just because you're an owner doesn't equal good. You're taking more risk, and you have to spend you have to bear the cost of the operation. You have to come up with the ideas. You have to find the customers. You have to be on the phone at all hours of the night. Anthony Cumia was talking about this the other day. He goes, I loved just coming in, doing my show, and then going home. But now that I own my own business, I'm having to talk with all these people, having to make all these deals, which I suck at. And it's like, yeah, if you just want to show up and work without being an owner, then you should be allowed to. What the heck is wrong with that? So yeah, I think the socialist is fighting the wrong battle on that. I think they should just accept we're right.
Yeah, wouldn't that just make everything great?
That would make everything great. Bastiat says, does make a reference to economics. He's saying, essentially, economics is the science of determining whether the interests of human beings are harmonious or antagonistic. This is sort of foreseeing that if two people voluntarily trade, they do so because doing so will make both of them wealthier, which increases wealth. Forcing one party to participate destroys the wealth of that person, increasing the wealth of the other person, the coercer. He says, this must be known before a science of politics can be formulated to determine the proper functions of government. He then gives a warning, saying that they will advocate, quote, guaranteed minimum of clothing, housing, food, and all the other necessities of life in order to usher in a socialist statist enterprise. Any thoughts on that?
Does that sound like the universal basic income to you?
That's exactly what that is. Or that's FDR's, right to health care, right to all this. And that's exactly what Bernie Sanders, every time he says, we have the right to health care. When really, you do have the right to health care, which means I have a right to get health care from someone without a group of psychopaths called the Food and Drug Administration, or OSHA, violently stopping us. So he doesn't know what positive rights are. Or negative rights, for that matter. Then again, he's still probably the smartest democratic socialist there is.
Well, we saw Ocasio-Cortez say that the three branches of government are the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
And she referred to them as chambers, which was the best part.
Where do they find these fucking people? Sorry for the expletive. I've been trying not to swear on the podcast, but where do they find these people?
I really have no clue.
I mean, but the thing is that she is smart in a certain way. She knows her demographic. I think she really does. Did that gaffe lose her any supporters, or let's say, did that gaffe lose her supporters that she didn't already not have? That doesn't make sense either. But you know what I mean? Like, it didn't lose her any. Sorry, that's my cat. It didn't lose her any people that already hate her, still hate her for that. But Democratic Socialists would probably give her a pass for that, right?
Of course they would. They'd give her a pass on anything. Bastiat then goes into Ocasio-Cortez's favorite discussion, inequality. By the way, if this moron believed in equality, she wouldn't believe Congress has the right to make laws and force the rest of us to do whatever Congress tells us to. Then we could force them to do things, or no one could force anyone. Either way, that's the pinnacle of inequality. Right. A few congressmen forcing their beliefs on hundreds of millions of strangers.
But the state is us, and we are the state.
I know. It's an extension of us. Rothbard made the analogy of the Holocaust was a mass suicide if you believe the state is us, because it was just people killing themselves. Right. They are the state. They're the bullet coming into it's a great one. Bastiat says, inequality in what regard? In income, literature, luxury, art, leisure. So in other words, when the socialist says we want equality, hold on, do you just mean equality of assets, of income? Or what about the fact that I have like 1,900 subscribers on YouTube and the Young Turks have millions? I mean, talk about inequality. Shouldn't the state violently stop people from subscribing to them and force them to watch me? Doesn't that equality count for something? Maybe they should have to read my articles and not be allowed to read any of Paul Krugman's stuff. Of course, it's all nonsense. And this is why, this isn't in the book, but this is why the Obamas of the world and the Bernies love to talk about equality, simply because it's unachievable. And you can always keep moving the goalposts. No, we want equality in this area. We want equality now in this area. Well, now in this area, because you can't define it. Even if all property was distributed equally among Americans, within like an hour, people would act differently. Some would invest the money, some would spend the money, and now you have inequality. And now you can make more laws and more regulations. He goes on to say, inequality being unachievable, he says the law is responsible for all individual misfortunes and all social inequalities. Once you say that, then the door is open to endless succession of complaints, irritations, troubles, and revolutions. Saying, I invariably reach this one conclusion. The solution to the problems of human relationships is to be found in liberty. Look at the entire world, he says. Which countries contain the most peaceful, the most moral, and the happiest people? In short, the happiest, most moral, and most peaceful people are those who most nearly follow this principle. Although mankind is not perfect, still all hope rests upon the free and voluntary actions of persons within the limits of their rights. Law or force is to be used for nothing except the administration of universal justice, which he previously defined as opposition to plunder. That is all the notes I have, and I hope you enjoyed that summary.
Yeah, I love when we do these. I mean, there needs to be more of these primers on the great works, I suppose. This is not meant to be a substitute for taking in the great works, as I call them, the great works. But I've enjoyed doing this series with you, man.
Loved it, brother. Can't wait for our next one.
Yeah, what is our next one? Do you have another?
You know what? I have no clue. I will do some thinking, and we can tweet it out later.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, so of course the solution to all of our problems is liberty. If everyone would just have the same realization that we've had. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. It's pretty simple, guys. I'm just glad, you know, and once you see it that way, you don't see the world any other way.
Absolutely. You can't unswallow this red pill. Many you can, but not this one.
Okay, well, before we go here, I just wanted to share. You guys all know how to support the Liberty Weekly podcast, and that is at patreon.com/Liberty Weekly. You can see here, Patreon, this is my dashboard, but we have a new patron, and that is Josh Bond, has joined us and decided to help supporting us at the $1 a month tier level. For that, you get a shout out on the show just like this, and also a personalized email from me, which thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate the support. I know that you've been interacting with the show and listening for a while as well, so that is great news. Apologies, I haven't gotten a show out. I've been dealing with a lot of personal stuff here. So looking forward to putting out more content with Keith. Also, don't forget to visit us at libertyweekly.net/Amazon. There's Amazon affiliate links as well as an Amazon affiliate link button here. That helps to support the site, also to help me pick up some books so that we can do reviews like this. So I think that's just about everything, Keith. I think that I want to throw up one of your interviews next. So we'll have this one come out, and then we'll do an interview next later on in this week. So till next time, though. Peace out.